I heard my daughter screaming for help from the basement. She was crying, begging someone to save her. The voice sounded desperate and completely terrified, echoing up through the floorboards. But when I turned to look, my daughter was standing right beside me, holding my hand. She wasn't in the basement. She was right there, staring up at me with wide, frightened eyes full of panic. I asked her if she heard it too. She nodded very slowly, her tiny fingers squeezing my hands so tightly that it almost hurt. Then she whispered something that made my blood freeze inside my veins. She said, "Mommy, that's the strange thing that looks exactly like me. It lives down there. Please don't let it come upstairs ever again." My name is Jolene Marsh. I am 32 years old, and I'm a single mother raising my 7-year-old daughter, Bria. We moved into our house 6 months ago, right after my divorce. I believed we were starting over, beginning fresh, finally stepping into safety. But something had been living in our basement the entire time, quietly watching us, studying us, and waiting for whatever moment it believed perfect. Before I tell you what we finally discovered down there, make sure you subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from today. Because what I'm about to share still keeps me awake every single night long after midnight. 6 months before that night, I signed papers on our house and thought I was giving my daughter the life she truly deserved again. My marriage to Warren had collapsed completely after I learned he was cheating behind my back. The divorce turned messy, painful, exhausting, heartbreaking, and left me emotionally drained. But I walked away with full custody of Bria and enough money to buy us a small home in a quiet little Ohio town. The house was older, built sometime in the 1970s, worn but sturdy. It needed some work, but it had good bones and strong structure. 2 stories, a backyard where Bria could play, and a basement I planned to turn into storage whenever I could. The price was low because it had been sitting on the market for nearly an entire year without any buyers. The previous owners had moved out suddenly without a clear explanation given. Nobody seemed to know why they left abruptly. I didn't ask many questions. I simply saw an opportunity and jumped toward it without hesitation. My older sister Denise, who is 38 and always the cautious one, said I was rushing way too quickly ahead. She kept asking whether I researched the house properly or knew the neighborhood well enough beforehand. I told her I was fine and capable. I told her I wanted a fresh start for me and Bria, somewhere we could build new memories without carrying the shadow of my failed marriage behind us. The first few months were calm, peaceful, steady. Bria adjusted to her new school and made a couple of friends. I've settled into my routine, working night shifts at the hospital, 3 days each long week. While Denise came over to stay with Bria, life felt normal again for the first time in what felt like years of constant chaos. I was exhausted but genuinely happy inside again. I finally felt like I was steering my own life with confidence. But then Bria started talking about the other girl she sometimes saw. It began incredibly small. She mentioned a new friend visiting her sometimes. I assumed it was just an imaginary friend, which is completely normal for a child her age trying to cope. I even found it a little bit sweet. Bria was an only child and probably created a companion to play with when she felt lonely or bored inside. Then the details started to grow much stranger. Bria said the friend looked exactly like her, same hair, same face, same clothes every time. She said the friend barely blinked and smiled in a way that felt deeply, horribly wrong. She said this friend asked questions like, "What time does mommy come home from work? And where does mommy keep the extra house keys?" I laughed it off, telling myself Bria simply had an active imagination. 2 weeks before everything happened, I discovered muddy footprints in the hallway. They started near the basement door and trailed all the way into Bria's bedroom upstairs silently. When I asked Bria if she went down into the basement alone, she promised she hadn't. She looked truly scared when she whispered that. I didn't believe her. I thought she was just trying to avoid getting in trouble for going somewhere. I told her never to go. I cleaned up the footprints and moved on, forgetting all about them. I wish I hadn't. I wish I had asked her more questions. I wish I had gone down into that basement and looked around, but I was busy and exhausted and overwhelmed. I convinced myself it was nothing worth noticing. That became my biggest and most unforgivable mistake. The night everything changed was a Saturday evening in the end of October, cold and quiet. I had the weekend off from work, which was rare for me. And I wanted to spend real time with Bria, just the two of us relaxing together. We made warm popcorn and picked a movie to cuddle up with. It was supposed to be a perfectly normal night, just a mother and daughter enjoying each other's company inside their safe, peaceful little home. But our home was never truly safe, and we were never alone. We were about halfway through the movie when I suddenly heard it, a scream coming from somewhere far below us. It was a child's voice, high and desperate, crying for someone's help. The words were clear. "Daddy, help me. Please, Daddy, help me now." The voice sounded exactly like Bria's pitch. Same tone, same little inflections, the same way she pronounces certain soft words. For a split second, my brain couldn't process what was happening. Because my daughter was sitting right beside me on the couch in silence. I looked at Bria and she was frozen. Eyes were huge and her face had gone shockingly pale white. She stared at the floor like she could see straight through it to wherever that sound was rising up from. I asked if she heard it too, and she nodded slowly without lifting her gaze upward. Her whole body was stiff, like she was too terrified to move. The screaming continued louder. "Daddy, please! I'm scared! Help me, Daddy, please!" Was coming from the basement. There was absolutely no question about that. The floor muffled it, but it was definitely coming from below us, from behind that door in the kitchen that I always kept shut. I didn't understand why the voice was calling for Daddy at all. Warren hadn't been part of our lives for over a year now. He moved away to another state after the divorce and barely even remembered Bria's birthdays anymore. There was no reason for anyone inside this house to be calling for him in terror. It didn't make sense, and that made it even more horrifying overall. I asked Bria, who was down there screaming. She finally looked up at me, and I will never forget the expression written on her face in that moment. She looked like she had been carrying a dark, terrible secret for a very long time and was finally about to tell me everything. She whispered that it was the thing that looks exactly like her. She said it lives in the basement alone and comes upstairs sometimes, whenever I am gone. She said it pretends to be her friend, but it isn't truly a friend at all. It asks too many questions and smiles wrong and never blinks the way normal people do. My heart was pounding so hard, okay? I could feel it pulsing up into the back of my throat with force. I wanted to believe Bria was making everything up, that her imagination had twisted the scary sounds into something unreal, but the terror in her eyes was genuine. This wasn't a game to her at all. She was truly terrified. I asked Bria why she never told me any of this before. She said she tried, but I didn't believe her the first times. She said every time she mentioned the other girl, I told her it was imaginary play. She thought I would get upset if she kept bringing it up, so she stopped talking about it altogether eventually. But the thing never stopped coming to visit. It came to her at least once weekly, always when I was working my hospital shifts. Always. When Aunt Denise was busy in another room far away inside. The screaming from the basement suddenly fell silent. The quiet was almost worse than the noise. I sat there frozen on the couch holding Bria tightly against me, straining my ears for any sound at all. For a few seconds there was absolutely nothing. It's just the movie still playing on the television, cheerful cartoon voices echoing wrongly. Against the terror spreading through our living room like thick smoke. Then I heard footsteps. They came from the basement stairs directly below. Slow, heavy footsteps rising one at a time, climbing upward toward the door with deliberate weight. I counted them quietly in my head automatically. 1, 2, 3. for each step felt like it took an eternity. Each step dragged whatever was down there closer and closer toward us. Bria buried her face against my arm, trembling. She was shaking so violently I could feel it through my entire body like cold electricity, she whispered. Please don't let it get me, Mommy. Please, please don't. I had never heard my daughter sound so small or so afraid. Something inside me broke. I was supposed to protect her from everything. Was supposed to keep her safe always. Okay? And something had been living in our house, terrorizing her for months, and I had no idea it was happening. The footsteps reached the very top of the stairs and then stopped. The basement door handle began turning very slowly, like whoever stood behind it wanted us watching, wanted us to know they were coming forward. I watched the handle twist inch by inch. I knew I had only seconds to make a decision that could save our lives forever or end them instantly. I didn't wait to see what was going to push through that old basement door next. Every instinct inside me screamed for me to get my daughter out of that house immediately. I grabbed Bria fast and lifted her off the couch, holding her tight against my chest. She wrapped her arms around my neck and her legs around my waist, clinging so tightly she wouldn't ever let go no matter what. I ran straight toward the front door quickly without daring to look back even a little. My phone was in the kitchen, far away. My keys were sitting on the counter right next to the basement door we were fleeing. I couldn't go back for them and risk facing whatever was positioned behind that turning handle. It stood between me and everything I needed to call for help or drive far away. So I left it all behind instantly. I chose my daughter over everything else possible. And I would make that same choice again 1,000 different times. I yanked open the front door and ran outside into the cold late October night air. The icy air hit my face hard, and I realized I wasn't wearing shoes at all. Neither was little Bria. We were both dressed in thin pajamas only, completely unprepared to be outside in the dark. But I didn't care. I ran across our front yard quickly and headed straight toward the neighbors' house across grass, a small brick home where an older man named Mr. Holloway lived. I had spoken to him only a few times since moving in, but he always seemed kind enough and calm. I was desperate tonight. I pounded on his door with one hand while holding Bria tightly with my other arm. I yelled for him to open up quickly, too. Please help us. It felt like forever before the porch light finally flicked on above. The door swung open and Mr. Holloway stood there in his robe looking confused and concerned. He asked what was wrong and I could barely get the words out through my shaking. I told him someone was inside my house. I told him I needed him to call the police immediately now. He didn't ask questions. He simply stepped aside and let us enter, then walked straight to his phone and dialed 911 without hesitation. I stood in his living room holding Bria, both of us trembling from cold and fear. Bria still hadn't said one single word since we ran out together. She kept her face pressed deep into my shoulder, her shaking body pressed tightly against mine. While Mr. Holloway spoke to the emergency operator, I asked timidly if I could use his phone next for calling. I needed to call my sister right away. Denise picked up on the second loud ring, and I told her everything as fast as my mouth could move. I said someone was living inside our basement. I said they had been coming upstairs often and talking to Bria. I said we were at the neighbor's house waiting for the police. Denise didn't waste any time asking for details. She said she was getting into her car immediately and would arrive within 15 quick minutes. The police arrived even before Denise managed to reach the neighborhood street. 2 officers pulled up in front of my house, and I watched from Mr. Holloway's window as they approached slowly toward the front door. One officer came over to speak with me first, asking me to describe everything that happened. I told him about the screaming downstairs, the voice that sounded like my daughter crying, terrified. The footsteps on the basement stairs, the slow turning door handle moving. He listened intently and wrote down every detail. Then he and his partner went inside to search through the house. Those next 10 minutes became the longest in my entire terrified life. I stood at the window holding Bria tightly, watching flashlight beams slide past the windows inside my own dark home. I didn't know what they would find down there in the shadows. I didn't know if someone would come rushing out or suddenly attack. I didn't know if the officers were safe or if something awful was about to happen. Denise arrived finally and rushed inside Mr. Holloway's house, calling our names. She took one look at me and Bria and pulled us into a long, tight hug. She kept whispering that it was going to be okay, that the police were handling everything, that we were safe now. Inside this house, I wanted to believe her so desperately, but I couldn't relax yet. Not until I knew what was inside that basement waiting in darkness. Finally, one of the officers walked out of my house and headed toward Mr. Holloway's porch. He knocked on the door firmly, and when I opened it slowly, I could tell instantly from his expression that something was seriously wrong. He said they didn't find any person inside, but they found something in the basement that I needed to see. I didn't want to step back into that house again at all, okay? Every part of me wanted to stay right here holding my daughter safe in Mr. Holloway's warm, quiet living room. But the officer said it was very important. He said I needed to witness what they had uncovered so I could somehow help them figure out what was truly happening here tonight. Denise immediately offered to stay close with Bria, and I kissed her. Soft forehead gently before promising her I would come right back soon. She tried not letting go of me tightly, but Denise carefully gathered her into steady arms and kept her close. I crossed the yard beside the officer silently, my bare feet numb against the cold grass. The front door stood wide open with lights burning brightly in every room, like nothing unusual. It looked completely normal from the outside view, just an ordinary home in an ordinary neighborhood. But I understood now it had never been normal at any time. Something had been hiding in it all along. The officer guided me through the kitchen toward the basement door slowly. It was open now, and I could see the wooden stairs stretching downward into heavy darkness. Another officer was already moving around down there, the glow of his flashlight shifting constantly across shadows and concrete shapes. I inhaled deeply before following the first officer down the steps, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. The basement was unfinished, just concrete floors plus exposed pipes beside old boxes left unopened still. But the officer walked me to the corner behind the water heater, a spot I honestly never paid attention to. There was a section of the wall that looked slightly different compared to the rest around. The officer pushed softly and it swung open quietly like a door. It revealed a hidden room someone had built using a false wall to create a secret space I never knew even existed. In there, what I saw inside that cramped room made my stomach twist violently. A small mattress sat on the floor with dirty blankets piled high. There were empty cans stacked tightly in one corner, dozens collected together like someone had been eating here for months. There were water bottles, some empty and some still half-filled left. And on the walls were drawings like children's. Drawings, or at least drawings pretending to be made by a child. But something looked wrong. The lines far too controlled and deliberate overall. An adult had created these, trying to mimic a little child's style. Every drawing showed the same little girl figure, a girl with brown hair exactly like Bria. Some showed the girl playing outside in a yard identical to ours. Some showed her sleeping in a bed identical to Bria's familiar bed. And some were covered with messy handwriting spelling out chilling broken sentences. The words said things like, "I want to be her because she has everything I deserve, and soon it will finally be my turn." But the worst part was the photographs displayed in a clustered section pinned tightly to drywall. They were all pictures of Bria, images showing her walking toward school, playing safely in our backyard, or captured through the bedroom window silently. Someone had been watching my daughter for months, following her everywhere quietly, photographing her secretly, without either of us realizing. The officer explained they found identification hidden here. The person living here was a woman named Candace Vine, aged 29. She had been missing from a psychiatric facility for about 3 months. Her history included obsessive behavior and intense delusions. Police believed she had been staying down here for nearly 4 months, meaning she was already living beneath us when we first moved in. The officer clarified that Candace had been studying my daughter closely daily, listening through the walls and floors, learning how Bria talked or sounded when frightened or joyful or even quietly sad. She practiced mimicking Bria's voice repeatedly for weeks. The screaming I heard calling for Daddy earlier was Candace using everything she had learned practicing trying to lure someone down into the basement. She had heard Bria talking about missing her father and believed that word would actually work. The police found Candace hidden tightly inside the crawlspace beneath our back porch steps outside. She had slipped there when she heard us leaving the house earlier. When they dragged her out from the darkness, she was wearing the very same pajamas Bria had worn the day before without a change, the same soft pink pants and the same tiny star-patterned shirt. She had been preparing something unimaginably dangerous for us, and we barely escaped everything just in time before it happened. Candace was arrested that night and transported back into psychiatric custody immediately, with several additional criminal charges formally filed against her following the discovery. The police explained she would now be facing charges for stalking Bria, breaking and entering repeatedly, child endangerment without hesitation, and illegal surveillance activities. The district attorney stated her case was one of the most disturbing examples of obsessive behavior they had encountered recently in many troubling years. Candace had no previous history of physical violence, but her growing fixation on my daughter had slowly escalated for months. The officers interviewing her claimed she truly believed she was meant to replace Bria completely someday. She thought by studying my daughter long enough and learning every detail, she could eventually become her entirely in mind. Doctors at the psychiatric facility said her delusions deepened severely after stopping her medication abruptly again. And she had escaped, specifically searching for a child she could attach herself to dangerously close. The investigation revealed how she had been entering our home repeatedly unnoticed. There was an old cellar door located along the side of the basement leading directly outside. It sat hidden behind thick, overgrown bushes completely, and I had never realized the door existed. The previous owners must have known about it, and I began wondering if that explained their sudden decision to move out quicker than expected. Candace had discovered the door and used it to come and go whenever she wanted freely. She moved in before we ever arrived here, hiding inside that secret room behind the false wall, simply waiting quietly to see who would buy the house next. When she saw Bria, something inside her broken mind decided my daughter was the one she desperately wanted to become. I couldn't stop imagining all the times Candace had been inside our home without my knowledge. She had gone through our belongings without permission. She had watched us eat dinner unsuspectingly inside. She had stood outside Bria's bedroom quietly while my daughter peacefully slept. Every memory I held of our first 6 months in that house now felt completely contaminated by knowing we were never truly alone there. Every time I believed Bria and I enjoyed a private moment together, Candace might have been listening from below silently, learning our routines carefully, planning her next step, and waiting for opportunity. Bria struggled for a long time after that night happened to us. She had nightmares nearly every night for weeks. She woke up screaming, convinced that the other girl was standing inside her room watching silently. She refused to be alone anywhere in the house, even the bathroom she once used confidently. I took her to see a child therapist who specialized strictly in trauma and recovery work. And slowly, week by week, my daughter began to heal little pieces. But she was never entirely the same again. She lost some of that carefree, innocent light children are supposed to carry naturally through childhood. She learned far too young that the world can be dangerous suddenly and that monsters exist. They just don't look the way you expect them. To appear normally, I've sold the house 2 months later completely. I couldn't stay there anymore, and I couldn't ask Bria to either. Every time I walked past the basement door, my stomach twisted painfully inside from sickening fear. Every creak in the floorboards made me jump. The home meant for our fresh beginning became a place of nightmares. We moved into an apartment much closer to Denise, which felt safer. It was smaller and more expensive, but had no basement at all. That was the only detail I cared about. Denise became an even bigger part of our lives after everything happened. She helped me find the apartment, helped us move, helped Bria feel safe inside her space. I don't know what I would have done without her steady support. She never once said "I told you so" about the house beforehand, even though she had every right to say those words out loud. She just showed up and took care of us when we needed her comfort the most. I learned something very important from this entire experience haunting our lives. I learned to listen to my daughter fully. When Bria told me about the strange girl who looked just like her, I dismissed everything. I thought it was simply imagination running wild. When she said the girl asked weird questions and smiled wrong sometimes, I told her nothing was real happening there, but it was real. My daughter was trying to warn me for months, and I never took her seriously enough. Children notice subtle things that adults often overlook. They sense when something is wrong, even when they cannot explain properly. If your child tells you something is scaring them, listen carefully immediately. Really listen, because they might be seeing something you completely are missing. I still think about Candace, sometimes quietly alone. I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't heard her voice that night echoing downstairs. I wonder how much longer she would have waited before finally making her terrifying final move. The identical pajamas she wore when police found her still haunt me. She was ready for something dark and dangerous. She was building toward something frightening and deliberate. And I am grateful every single day now that we got out before learning what it ultimately would have been. My daughter is safe now in our home. She smiles more than she used to before. She sleeps through the night most of the time, which comforts me. We built a new life in our little apartment, and we're okay. But I never forget how close I came to losing her completely. I never forget that a woman lived beneath our feet, wanting desperately to steal my daughter's identity, her life, her place inside this world. If something feels wrong inside your home environment, trust that feeling immediately. If your child tells you they're scared of something, believe their words. Don't wait until it's almost too late again, like I painfully did. If this story made you hold loved ones a little closer tonight, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And drop a comment below telling me, have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong in your home? I want to hear your stories here. Oh, and you never know who might need hearing them shared by you.